So growing up, I we lived on a small farm on the northern part of Huntington County, Indiana, and I had two brothers and two sisters, and so we grew up taking care of cattle. And then when I was young, we had pigs and the farm ground to take care of, and so we also had. I remember a big memory was 4-H, so we showed steers at the county fair in the summertime. And then most of the rest of the year, you're taking care of the steer and getting it trained and taking care of it. So we all worked pretty hard, as brothers and sisters, and just baling hay and all those different things that you do. Uh, and so I think we all worked very hard because we were outside a lot. Even my sisters, they were out there. They did a lot. They did the same things we did, and as the boys did, they did the same thing. And so we worked very hard, but I think we had learned to have fun, at the same time. And so it wasn't so bad, when you do things as kind of a team or as a group. And I got to know a lot of had came had a lot of friends, I guess, in 4-H. That's where I learned to meet a lot of folks there. I think that stays with me today. I still love being outside, being pretty just physical activities. And that was something that we did a lot as a family. And we're all pretty close, a lot of us. So I get home as much as I can, and we gather, and it's pretty good. So I'm very grateful for that opportunity. And living with the Friars is a very similar type of family. We're a little more spread out. The Friars, there's a lot of them, but we try to care for each other in that same sort of way. My first contact with the Capuchin Friars was where I grew up in the parish. I was in grade school when I began to know them, and when I learned how to serve in fourth grade, there were Capuchins there, and I served every Sunday for like every other Sunday up until I graduated high school. So I got to know a lot of the different friars that came through the times. Also, just in the normal parish activities, I knew a lot of them. And, pretty much all my brothers and sisters had a Capuchin, involved with their marriages to their spouses. So I also saw them in that capacity as well. And I just came to appreciate the way they were respectful of people, and the situations that people were going through, whether it be something very glorious or something very sorrowful. They were always respectful to people. And, at the time, I didn't know what a Capuchin was. I didn't know what a friar was. I just thought they were priests. I didn't know. But I did notice the way that they did things, and just the respect they showed people and the kindness I thought was pretty amazing, and later, after I joined the Capuchins later on in my adult life, I learned that while I didn't know growing up that they were Capuchin Franciscan friars, their style was a very Franciscan style of spirituality. So the way they interacted was very Franciscan. And so that's what I was that's what I was attracted to, the way they treated people like they would treat their own brothers and sisters, a very kind and respectful manner. And so, yeah, it was later I found out, oh yeah, I understand now, they were Franciscan Capuchins. And so even though I didn't know their name, I knew the way that they did things, and it makes a lot of sense now, and I'm very grateful for that. I mean, when I started to think about living that sort of life, I was older, and I was finishing up college. So that's when I started asking. I have an aunt who was a Holy Cross sister there at Notre Dame, and that was where their order was. And so I started asking her questions, and she explained a lot of, there's a diocesan priest, and then there's a religious priest, and then religious brother, so she explained a lot of the different things to me, and then that's when I started to learn some of the details of how things were different within that look. But I but ever since I was in fourth grade, I mean, I could see the way they did things, and it was very inspiring and just very kind, and the way they treated people. I mean, they weren't perfect. I mean, but I think they did their best, and it was very nice. Discernment for me was a very difficult thing. I was in the middle of a very serious relationship at during some of the time I was discerning, and so to choose religious life instead of marriage was the most difficult thing that I've ever done, and I still think about it sometimes. But I know that of these different paths that one might take in their life, whether it be single life or religious life or married life, that all of these are holy. Yeah, for me, I remember looking at this life a little bit, and it's always impressive the things you see, like caring for the homeless and soup kitchens, and it just seems like really impressive ministry things. But it's like, oh, okay. But then there was one line that said, we celebrate birthdays. And I thought, yeah, that's kind of what I'm looking for. I really need to be also a human being, and you know watch TV, have supper, clean, and do those other mow grass, do these other things that you would normally do, like with a family. Because one of my dangers is just my whole life would turn into work, and that's just not. That's just not a healthy way to live. It's not the way I wanted to live, but I could easily slip into that. And but the idea that the fraternal piece is pretty good. We kind of hold each other in check, and that's how you stay humble, because sometimes brothers take you down a notch or two if you're. But we're all flawed, in many ways, but we care for each other even in spite of those flaws, and that's the foundational kind of experience. If things go really bad, that you're still a part of the group, and it's going to be all right. Well, my experience, especially like in the first few years when I joined, the Capuchins will move you around quite a bit from city to city, and we have different friaries all over the Midwest, and there's Capuchins all over the world. So depending on your ministry and what they're having you do, you'll be moving to different cities and different friaries. And so when I was being trained in formation, we call it, for the first 4 years, I remember my first year was in Brooklyn. And then, you get to know everybody out there, from the custodians to everyone, and then all of a sudden next year I was in Wisconsin for a year, and same thing, get to know everybody, and then all of a sudden, boom, and we moved to Toronto for a year, and then down to Chicago for a year. And I know at that point I was starting to feel like, gosh, is everything always goodbye? It's always goodbye. And then even after that, it's maybe every 3 or 5 years, still get moved quite a bit. And so that's been happening, ever since I started with the Capuchins. So I had to think about that a lot, just the idea of being moved so much and always saying goodbye, and that starts to wear on a person just in terms of grief, because you're always parting ways. And I think what started to happen was I was just worried, like, will we all forget each other? Is that all this is about? You just move and then everybody forgets each other and it's over. But then I started to notice my own feelings, like I didn't forget people at the places where I lived, whether that's regarding people I knew in ministry, people I served, or people I worked with, or friends I made at different places. Like, I didn't forget, and I still cared for people. And then over time I started to realize, and I guess start to trust, that they didn't forget me either. And so that was I started to get a lot more peace from that. People don't forget, people still care for me, and I care for them. And even though sometimes I might not see them again, or it might be a long time before we see each other, but just knowing that there's people I care for out there and they care for me, wow, I don't know if there's much more you can ask for, so that gave me a lot of peace in terms of just the heart personal experience. And that's probably been the biggest thing, is the relationships that you build along this journey. And even though they seem incomplete, and they kind of are in this life, I always pray or expect that somehow in this life or the next, God's going to bring to completion relationships, or not to completion, but to fullness, we'll say, these relationships. So I look forward to that, but I'm very grateful for being privileged to be a part of people's lives. And I've found a lot of peace in that. In terms of some other ministries, there's been a lot of very powerful moments that I've been privileged to witness or be a part of. And they're very sad and sometimes beautiful at the same time. And I think one was just at the soup kitchen there in Detroit, to see how everything worked together to kind of help someone find healing, and I remember there was a lady that came into the soup kitchen at lunchtime, and one of our staff at the soup kitchen noticed that her feet were bleeding, like she had just come in and she had no shoes. You could tell she was just in a lot of trouble, distress. And so that brought it to attention. They said, I don't think she's ever been here before. She's new. So she did not know what services we had or what she could do. So we had one of our social workers maybe sit down, and one of our social workers talked with her a little bit to kind of find out how she's doing. And we got her feet, got some got some bandages and some shoes and clothes. But she didn't talk much. She didn't say much. But we just kind of explained, we're here every day. This is what we do. And then just every day over the next 2 or 3 weeks, she started to look a little bit better, and then we had a shower program. She started to use that. And then the social worker kept working with her. But you could just see a gradual change over time. And I think some of that is trust, when someone comes in, they want to, they don't know how they're going to be treated or what's available. And what I appreciated was just all the different staff, no matter what they did, they were always kind of watching out for people and trying to find out a way to help people feel comfortable and welcome. And then when they're ready, if they want to go take advantage of one of the services there, they could. So, but that was a very moving experience for me, to see. Yeah, and I think it was like after 4 days, she finally gave her name, so people don't want to give their names. So it was just neat to see the kindness of the staff and slowly watch a person feel more at home and a little more engaged, in life, I think. So that was a very touching experience. Yeah, it's hard for me to explain like how I feel for 25 years of vows. I guess I'm really not an event type of guy. It's just I've felt all along just kind of the same. So it doesn't feel like any different, but I think when I look back, sometimes what I appreciate is just, sometimes it's a hard life. It is for everybody. You're just trying to live each day and to get through things and do the best you can. And it's nice sometimes. I remember like you get at the end of the year and you look around and say, hey, we just we made it. We got through it, and hopefully a little better off. We've learned some things, and still growing and learning. And so to me, that's might seem odd, but that's a powerful experience for me, is like just getting older with others over the years. And it's like, coming to know each other better, and still changing, still growing. It's nothing's ever the same, everything is a pretty dynamic life. But I just, that sense of getting older together with people and trying to walk the journey with others, and just sometimes you look back and say, wow, we're doing it, and it's all right. We're gonna be all right. And there's times it just seems to me, when I'm in the middle of the life, it seems pretty normal. You get up, you pray, you work, and and then other times it will seem really odd, like just the way we structure religious life is very different. So, and sometimes I'll be sitting at meditation, with the friars there, and I'm just thinking, man, this is, am I crazy? Am I going crazy? Why would this seems like a crazy life. And then I kind of take a deep breath and I look around and I say, well, he's pretty normal. He's pretty normal. He's pretty normal. Like he grew up on a dairy farm, and he's pretty nice, pretty normal guys doing pretty normal work, like the best work that they're able to do. And we care for each other. We cook and we work and we pray. And I thought, this isn't so crazy, and so while there's no like fireworks or anything, like on 25 years, there is a sense of some peace in that I think we're all doing the best we can, and that there's some strong relationships that have some depth to them. And looking towards the future, it feels pretty solid and pretty hopeful. Of course, it's got its anxieties like everything else, but that's kind of the way life is. And so just trying to trust, in the future, and that these relationships will continue to be there, and hopefully God will God will help them blossom in the future. So I'm very grateful for that. Yeah.